Philosophy allows us to question the world and events around us. We can use the process of philosophical analysis to challenge norms, digest information, evaluate the worldview of others, and establish one of our own. The philosophies of this course have all posed interesting points that I've enjoyed grappling and accepting, but pragmatism and existentialism in particular caught my eye. This presentation focuses on these two philosophies with a smattering of others thrown in, as well as my own teaching philosophy. My main thesis centers around the fact that we all exist within a social construct, yet we are individuals. Teachers face the task of weaving a personal teaching philosophy into the system in which they teach. How do we reconcile these differences? More specifically, how do we reconcile these differences within the classroom? I will specifically focus on the relationship between pragmatism and existentialism in the context of U.S. and international schools. I am new to the U.S. education system. I was homeschooled myself, and although I have second and third grade sons, they spent their first years of education between homeschool preschool and then international schools. However, I am in my second year of graduate school in elementary education, and I've spent my 5 weeks working in my son's Wyoming elementary school analyzing the education system here in the States, as well as its philosophies, particularly in the context of this course. I reached the following conclusions, but keep my limited perspective in mind. I welcome your feedback on these ideas. I've entered the U.S. system at the tail end of the Common Core debate, and I'm catching up. Although I genuinely appreciate some of the philosophies of the Common Core, it'd be hard to deny that it is a blanket standard, a framework under which schools and teachers must work. The U.S. system seems to exist solely atop a framework of standards and standardized tests. These standards set the stage for the whole school year and are meant to categorize and itemize students according to ability and grade level. Some systems have come into place for special education, both for high and low achieving students, but these students tend to be placed based on the same standardized testing systems. The emphasis in the U.S. school system seems to be almost completely on literacy and math. Teachers are left to squeeze in other subjects as they can, but chances are limited and standards must be met by the end of each term. Teachers are bound by these standards and stereotypes abound, making it difficult to get to know and assess students as individual learners. On the whole, the U.S. system seems largely pragmatist-based, with the emphasis focusing on scientific method, a focus on using evidence to establish knowledge. It is highly process-to-product oriented, with product and assessment at the height of its goals. Pragmatists believe that acting on our best hypotheses with room for flexibility allows us to formulate generalizations about how the world works. The standards-based school system that runs American education today runs almost solely on generalizations built from the standardized tests given throughout the year. John Dewey places an emphasis on process, believing that human beings in interaction with the environment leads to knowledge. For Dewey and the pragmatists, all teaching is based on problem solving. You can see quite a bit of this as well in the U.S. school system, particularly with Common Core math and its emphasis on conceptual understanding through problem solving. With its constitutional idea of separation of church and state, the school system also touches on realism, promoting objective knowledge. Yet there's also some idealism to the system, with heavy emphasis on principles, such as the Golden Rule, anti-bullying, responsibility, respect. Many schools and classrooms adopt their own mottos, and of course all classes begin their day with the Pledge of Allegiance. Enter the existentialist teacher. With an emphasis on the individual and self-focused goals, it would be tough to find a place for the existentialist in the current U.S. school system. In many ways, existentialists bump up against pragmatist thinking, although the two do have many points of intersection. For existentialism, an individual's responsibility is to define ourselves and create our own purpose. There's an emphasis on individual relationships. A teacher can work with each student on an individual level to define their education. Really, this can complement pragmatism very well because it's all about process, all about using the scientific method, and really they can work together to help a teacher define the goals of each student as they work on their individual process. Existentialists also place heavy importance on nonconformity. You're supposed to keep to your own path rather than trying to fit into a system. Unfortunately, the U.S. education system is fairly generalization-based. It's all about the standardized tests, your grade level, where you're going throughout the school system. For an existentialist teacher, curriculum is pretty much divided into two parts. The givens, which is what we need to succeed in the world, basic literacy, reading and writing, and basic math understanding. And then more important to the existentialists are the self-formations, that which makes us what we are, the goal-defining, the purpose-driven life. So, how do we weave these two, or five-ish philosophies together? We can see a lot of contradictions, yet there is room for complement, particularly if the teacher is creative and the school can be flexible. Much like the beautiful tapestries in this slide, each teacher can weave their own philosophy onto the loom of their school. This can be done through the creation of a learning space that suits the teacher's philosophy. Use the standards of your school or district as your framework and neatly tie in your own preferred teaching. The existentialist teacher may build individual relationships and create student-led goals that still work within the framework of the pragmatist's common core. This can be done through creating an environment that reflects the teacher's philosophy. Just as a reference point, let's compare the U.S. system with the typical system of an international school. International schools do not have the boundaries of districts. They're private schools run by a highly diverse group of people, a situation that automatically lends itself to an array of perspective and blended philosophies. Plenty of opportunities for middle ground here. The international school must find a way to tailor education to the needs of children from dozens, if not hundreds of combinations of religions, cultures, languages, and social mores. This has led to a system of individualized learning, exploration, a diverse classroom environment. International schools are inquiry-based almost by necessity. This system has created a haven for intuitive, creative-type learners who love an exploratory style of learning. The existentialist teacher finds a home here with the freedom to make individual paths of tailored learning. But I do wonder if perhaps the more concrete learners and teachers may fall through the cracks. The U.S. creates a system where the average, the generalized, actually learn quite nicely, but the outliers cannot succeed without extreme struggle. Perhaps the international school does exactly the opposite. Either way, we may lose some of our students to the system. I must confess, my teaching philosophy aligns much more closely with the international school system. I fall fairly well in line with the existentialist teacher in a pragmatist system. In my mind, learning is like a beautiful witch's brew of ingredients, and they're really as varied as each individual student, which is why it's essential that we build relationships with our students. Everything from personality to interests of both the teacher and the student, learning styles of each, personal life, what might be going on with the student each day could change and change their learning. Building a classroom community and creating an environment conducive to learning that takes into account the needs of each student are all very important. And like I said, relationships are absolutely crucial. Teacher and student relationships, student to student, whole group, and community relationships. You have to create a community of learning. Whoops, excuse me. Going back. Classroom activities need to be process-oriented. It seems to me that in a standard-based system, it's all about the product. I spoke with Dr. Holland quite a bit about this with our phone conversation last week, where it's all about the tests and about the end projects, and really it needs to be much more process-oriented. It's the exploration itself, the questions students ask, the problem solving that they learn that can be applied to their lives day in and day out as children and as adults. The process needs to be building and connective all throughout the education. And then I also believe that assessment should be exploration-based through discussions and activities. If you know your students well, you can assess their growth. You can make an individualized learning plan without the need for tests and grades. So let's suspend reality for just a minute and pretend that as a teacher I can make my classroom any way I want. I envision a classroom in which the environment is wholly exploratory, blending pragmatism with existentialism, with the individual learning processes of each student. My day would center around the self-formation subjects, exploring social studies, sciences, the arts, and practical life skills. I would use these activities as vehicles for the givens, such as literacy and math, by using applicable methods. For example, writing workshops to gather research and analyze findings, math explorations using measurements for building projects, and mathematics for counting change at the grocery store. You could use volume and conversions in a cooking class. reading lots of different fiction and nonfiction to explore subjects that are real to their world. I realize, once again, my ideal may let others fall through the cracks, but I believe it can be done with care, finding a medium ground, working within the framework of standards that we do have to use within the U.S. school system at the time, and creating my own environment of applied learning. It's possible to weave your own tapestry from the pattern of another's creation. It requires understanding of the system in which one works, the ability to blend personal teaching philosophies with the existing system, and the creativity and drive to build a community of learning that inspires and guides students to success. This is why we study philosophy. This is why we learn to ask questions and constantly challenge thinking, that of the world, our students, and ourselves. After all, as the cliche goes, the best teacher is also a student.